Welcome to Mideast Realities. I'm your host, Mark Brzezinski. I've known Shimon Peres for almost 20 years. I first interviewed him in his Labor Party office in Tel Aviv in 1979. He was very moderate and very reasonable and very suave and sophisticated then. The difference between what Shimon Peres often says, especially to the Western English-speaking press, and what he and his party have done for so long is considerable. No one should believe, for instance, that what's taking place in Israel today is the responsibility just of the Likud party. The Likud and Labor have worked in tandem, trading jobs, often serving in unity governments for quite some time. And before Peres went totally into domestic political oblivion in Israel, he now concentrates on his political fortunes outside of Israel. He was, in fact, attempting to arrange a position for himself in the Bibi Netanyahu government, which didn't come to pass. Recently, Peres was interviewed on the PBS Charlie Rose show. Here in America, being interviewed on establishment TV programs is a pretty easy thing for Israelis. It's almost always a friendly questioner and a friendly atmosphere, whether it's the Larry King show or the Charlie Rose show. We have some clips from that interview, which we'd like to show you, and I'd like to then discuss the realities behind the policies that Peres has pursued and Peres is discussing. So let's go to the first clip.
He needs the left, and he has neither of the two of them completely.
Puts him in a bad place.
It is, yes. It is a bad place. But basically the whole negotiations over the last couple of years is a result of the composition of the government more than a result of the negotiations with the Arabs. And we weren't able to form the necessary majority to go ahead full speed as we should have in the direction of peace.
Do you believe a national unity government is necessary because Labor can't win? B, in order for Netanyahu and Likud to move forward, they need to form some new alliances, so therefore the only way to see what you want to see happen with the peace process is a unity government.
I think I'm too experienced to believe that anybody can forecast and say who will win and who will lose.
Yes, you've been there.
Yes. The nation is divided half and half.
Right.
And
half and half, Likud, Labor?
Yeah, the right and left, shall I say, the whole camp.
Right.
I think a national union government is needed for the sake of peace. The nature of the decisions that we have to make in the future are so heavy, so complicated, that a single party can hardly do it. Namely, half of the nation cannot really decide. I shall give you one or two examples. For example, if a one-party government will try and negotiate, and there will be an act of terror, they will stop. If there will be two parties, they can go on. When one party is negotiating, they're all the time watching the other half. They want to gain a little bit, for the next elections. When there are two parties, they can make a right decision. And on top of it, the gap between the two camps was very much narrowed, with Netanyahu giving up his prior position against any territorial compromise and offering to the Palestinians actually 40% of the West Bank. Today the problem of land for peace is no longer an ideological one, but a matter of mathematics. How many percentage are you going to give back or not?
All right, let's cut this interview right there and let me comment on what realities we're really dealing with here. Peres, of course, is out of power now. He has little likelihood of ever coming back to direct political power in Israel, although he's negotiating for every position he can get. He even wanted to be Secretary General of the UN, but that was before his army blew up the Kana refugee base, and he attempted to push that under the rug, only to be found out when journalists discovered video from UN forces showing that Kana wasn't a mistake, but in fact was something that the Israeli military was watching in real-time TV as their shells landed landed very precisely where they wanted them to. I mention Kana as an example of the duplicity of Shimon Peres. He thought that by being a hardliner, by assassinating Abu Yash in Gaza, the engineer, using a cell phone bomb, and then by attacking Lebanon, this is a couple of years ago before he was defeated, and then by covering up the Kana massacre, he thought that this would project him as a tough guy for the Israelis and they would vote for him. They did vote for Bibi. It sort of backfired on him because the Arab vote, which he was counting on, didn't go with Peres after what took place in Lebanon and the Kana massacre that I just mentioned. And that kind of characterizes Peres's political career. He's always been very crafty with words. He's always been very savvy politically. He's always maneuvered and twisted to get what he wanted. But the reality is he's never really been trusted for these reasons, and he's always been thought of as rather slimy and rather difficult to, trust. Trust is the word here in this case. Now, he's being rather more out front and rather more straightforward. He's admitting, in fact, that the differences that they magnify in Israel between Likud and Labor are far smaller than they like sometimes to project them as. It's now a matter of mathematics rather than ideology, now a matter of percentages. Of course, he doesn't mention specifically that it was his party, the Labor Party, that built most of the settlements and inaugurated most of the Israeli expansion into the occupied territories. Yes, the Likud wanted to build in somewhat different places, and they wanted to build a little more, and they wanted to give a little more emphasis to this political party or this movement. But on the whole, the two parties in Israel are sort of the good cop, bad cop routine, and they've played the Arab regimes and played the Palestinians. To an extent, they've also played American Jewry, which they have used to finance their campaigns, especially in recent years when television has come to dominate Israeli politics like it does in American politics. And aside, the rumor is that Dick Morris, not having much work in the States, is being sent off to Israel to help the Labor Party win the next election. Meanwhile, a national unity government, what they call it, simply meaning that they bring the two big parties, Labor and Likud, together, as they have done many times before, is certainly the way many people in Labor are maneuvering for, because they don't feel they can win an election outright, and because they feel that in this process of negotiating, quote-unquote, a final settlement, another ironic term, they're going to have to sort of compromise with each other. The Palestinians have little say in this. It's really up to the Israelis what they want to do. The Americans would have a considerable say, but being as infiltrated and outmaneuvered in Washington by the Israeli Jewish lobby as they are, the Americans really don't have an independent stance that they're able to pursue either. And that is not just a function of Bill Clinton. That will also be true in a Gore administration or in a Republican administration down the road a few years. But let's go back to the Peres interview.
Leader of the Labor Party.
Ehud Barak says two things. Number one, that he's against the national union government. And then he claims that Netanyahu did not offer openly and publicly and rightly the composition of a union government. If he will offer, and he may do it in my judgment next week.
Netanyahu will offer to Barak next week?
Yes, to the Labour Party to join it. It's a possibility.
Because he has no choice?
Because he has no choice, and because he wouldn't like to have an early elections for reasons of his own, which in my judgment, from his point of view, is right. Then there will be a very serious debate in the Labour Party, and I don't know the results. There may be a majority for entering a national union government.
But Barak will be on record as favoring a national unity government at that time, or not?
Right now he's against. What will happen if he will be offered, I can't answer. You see, ostensibly he was against, but at the same time he went to negotiate with Netanyahu. They met 3 times. So if you're against, you don't negotiate. So I would say a yes, but. I am not sure.
Now, can you see you leading a faction of the Labour Party that wants a national unity government and Barack leading a faction that's opposed?
Yes, but I am not going to be a spoiler. I'm not going to divide the party. I mean, it's right to have a debate within the party, but not more than that. I'm not going to split it.
The only reason not to have a unity government is because Labour thinks that eventually it can win alone.
Yes. You see, there are two problems. One is a matter of time. When will be the next elections? It's not clear if we have a majority for an area election. Otherwise, we and the peace will have to wait 2 years. 2 years is a very long period of time under the present conditions. And then in 2 years' time, God knows who will win. Now, we have to move ahead very seriously and not to let a vacuum deciding our future. I consider the time element as a highly important one.
All right, let's
to some of the
cut
other
this right at this point, because what Perez is saying really needs to be examined. He's not saying it very forcefully, but the reality is he, his party, everybody involved with the so-called peace process is extremely nervous at this point. They have put together, in the wake of the end of the Cold War and in the wake of the Gulf War with Iraq, a policy designed to sort of pretend that there is an accommodation, pretend there is a peace. And the real reason for doing so is not the Palestinians, which don't represent a serious threat to Israel. It's the entire Arab world. It's keeping the client regimes that work closely with the Americans in power. It's infiltrating the Middle East economically. It's working closely with the U.S. and Turkey in building a new military alliance that will dominate the region. It's making sure that oil supplies and very cheap prices are available to the West, which are very important for economic reasons. All of these things are behind the so-called peace process, which was designed by Perez, primarily working closely with Rabin. In the end, Perez and his ally and chief aide, Yossi Beilin, a former friend of mine also, they have been talking about a Gaza-first strategy for a very long time. They wanted to find a way to get the Palestinians to accept autonomy plus, not autonomy of the kind that has been put forward in other places, Turks, Armenians, Basques, but autonomy that allowed the Palestinians to march around, to have flags, to bring the PLO under the Israeli wing, and to create sort of a client regime within Israel itself. And that's what's been done. But it's been done in a very unstable way. It's been done in a way that has within it the potential for explosion and the potential for self-emulation, actually. And there isn't much time that these things can be left to dangle. Arafat himself probably won't survive this 2-year period, either physically in terms of his own health, or there's no secret that he has alienated tremendous groups within the Palestinian world and can only control his own people with a vast array of a dozen or more secret police forces and huge amounts of bribery and corruption and repression. But that said, let's go back to the Paris interview.
I believe that joining in a national unity government will not affect negatively the outcome of the coming elections. Because if the people will see that the Labour Party prefers the call of the nation upon its own considerations, and then Labour will also be accredited with participation in the effort to make peace, it may have a positive effect upon the future of Labour.
Why do you think Barack has not met more popular support as head of the Labour Party?
I don't know the reason. Probably he thinks that the majority resides in the center, and I'm not sure.
Where does the majority reside?
The majority resides in running ahead of the accepted views. You see, usually the future is always in a minority. And leaders must have the courage to make up their minds and join in the minority, which is a minority at present, in order to have a majority in the future. And my advice to him would be, look, make stronger positions, don't pay too much attention to the polls, and anyway, leaders must occasionally be controversial for the right reasons than popular for the wrong reasons.
Do you still harbor ambitions to be prime minister?
No.
No.
No, clearly not.
Unequivocally do not want to be prime minister. Your time has come and gone for that job.
I'm not interested in power per se. I had it more than enough, and I know it's illusionary. It's empty. I prefer to be a soldier in the army of peace than a general in the army of politics.
What role would you be comfortable with for Aric Sharon? Defense minister?
I'm not sure. You see, Aric Sharon has his own problem. He cannot detach himself too much from the right. Yet he understands deep in his heart that time has come for greater changes that he is supporting.
How do you know that in his heart?
I can appreciate. Surely I cannot know. I know Aric for 50 years. We are quite good friends. We talk among ourselves, between ourselves, and Aric always tells me, you know, I agree with your positions. I don't agree with your timetable. And I can understand why.
He agrees with your positions, but he thinks the time has not yet come.
No, he thinks the time running too far ahead.
He thinks you're too far ahead.
Yes.
He thinks that...
He thinks I'm impatient. I think we have...
Well, he's right.
He's right or wrong, God knows.
Well, you are impatient.
I think to be impatient is not a bad thing, you know.
Well, let's make sure we comment about this. I think many American Jews will be rather amazed to find out that Shimon Peres and Aric Sharon are close friends and have been so for a long time. It only shows that the divisions within Zionist politics are far, far less than they are projected to the outside world for political gain. Shimon Peres, for instance, is the darling of liberal American Jews from Spielberg to Bronfman. Lots of money is made available to the Labor Party because of people like Shimon Peres. And in fact, the sending over of Dick Morris that I mentioned before to help out in the next election campaign is, I'm sure, although I don't know the facts, is backed by financing coming from liberal American Jews. These same liberal American Jews think of Aric Sharon rightly as a cutthroat, as the man responsible for the massacre of Sabra and Shatila, not to mention for the invasion of Lebanon and the war in 1982. Before that, Aric Sharon had a reputation for being something of a butcher of Palestinians. Maybe the analogy of Adolf Eichmann for Jews is something that would apply to Aric Sharon in the minds of Palestinians. But nevertheless, here, Shimon Peres admitting more candidly than he ever has to my knowledge, being out of politics, he's now free to speak and reminisce much more than ever before. The admission that he and Aric Sharon are quite friends and agree on many things in the area of policy, if not in the area of timing and politics. This, of course, goes to the whole question of unity government, the whole question of what Israeli policies really are, which is at the bottom line, which is the bottom line of what we really should be discussing, because Israeli policies haven't really changed all that much. Not from the Labor Party alone plan after the 67 war, then through the Begin era, then through the Sharon plan of the late 70s and early 80s, up to the Oslo autonomy plan, which is being implemented now. The main difference has been allowing the Palestinians the symbols of statehood while corralling them and treating them with repressive techniques, autonomy restrictions. The settlements, of course, will remain. Yes, labor would be willing to remove a few for symbolic purposes. Likud insists that they all remain, which is not really the ultimate policy. Sharon oversaw the withdrawal from Yamit, south of Gaza as well. But nevertheless, this whole discussion of Sharon is a very important one, because Sharon epitomizes raw Zionism much more clearly than do people like Peres. People like Peres have always tried to project a rather different image, not to talk about how they were responsible for the settlements in the first place, not to talk about how they served in the past under Shamir, under Begin. All of these things are sort of pushed under the rug. It is very interesting, however, that Peres is coming out as sort of the leading exponent in the Labour Party for a national unity government headed by the Likud. And that is probably the direction Israeli politics will go for many reasons. But our program was only a half hour a week. Let's go back to the interview.
Momentum and much dynamism and energy.
But you have great respect and affection for Aric Sharon.
I have respect and I have affection for him. I know also his weaknesses, as he knows mine, which is natural after such a long acquaintance. But we can sit down and talk over things.
And what would he say are your weaknesses?
Yeah, for example, that I'm a man in a hurry.
Yeah. And you say you've got to be in a hurry because the train for peace is pulling out.
Yes, you know, somebody says that history is like a running horse. When it comes nearby your place, you better mount him and gallop with him than let him go. There are many occasions in history that if you let them go, they won't return, they won't be repeated. And I think the time is ripe for peace.
What does Benjamin Netanyahu think? And where is he? And is he ready to mount that horse?
He thinks that he can charm the horse, not only mount him, which is more complicated.
Seduce the horse.
Yes. I think he attaches a great deal of importance to the power of rhetorics, which again I'm not so sure that this is such a powerful instrument. But I think he too understands that we cannot remain where we are. Look, Israel has to make 5 major decisions. We cannot escape from them.
5?
5, yes.
What are they?
To select between the cost of war and the price of peace. It's not between war and peace, but the cost of war is imposed. The price of peace you can choose or deny. The second is, what will be the nature of the permanent solution? One state with 2 people fighting between the 2 of them forever, or 2 states trying to develop a neighborly relations, namely a Palestinian state. I say, for the sake of Israel remaining Jewish, democratic and peaceful, it is to our interest to have a Palestinian state.
And Netanyahu says if the Palestinians declare a state of their own, watch out.
Yes, but he suggests something which is impossible. He suggests an autonomy. If there will be an autonomy, we shall be almost half enough. Today we are 5 million Jewish people, 4 million Arabs, and this means in fact a binational state, which will be tragic for the 2 people. Number 3, what will be the rapport between the 2 states economically too? You know, war creates poverty, but poverty can also create belligerency. I think we should not look upon the Arabs as a source of cheap labor, but as an occasion of equal partners. And I think it is for us to help them to build a modern market economy, sophisticated, prosperous state. The better they will be, the better neighbor we shall have.
Well, so much for Shimon Peres on Charlie Rose. It's truly amazing language. All the right words, all the right concepts. Peace, brotherhood.
Incoming Speaker of the House, Israeli Foreign Minister Sharon asked that when Mr. Clinton visits Gaza, he should not land at the new airport, recently opened by Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, as Israel's failure to keep its promise to release hundreds of what they call political prisoners. But Sharon says, and the U.S. agrees, that there was no promise to release members of Hamas.
Territories, which themselves are only 23% of what was Palestine in 1948.
are waging what Sharon calls a new intifada to protest what they say.
The other people are in exile beyond the borders of the area. The other people are on autonomous reservations surrounded by the Israeli army. This is not a real peace, but it is the concept that Peres has brought forward because it was the only thing that he could bring forward within the context of Israeli politics. These issues are extremely complex, extremely convoluted, very difficult sometimes to understand, even for someone like myself who's been there.
Has not yet been made whether to fly or drive into Gaza. With violence against both Israelis and Palestinians escalating.
Same time of the week. For another Mideast Realities, I'm Mark Brzezinski, your host.